Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to begin.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nader Naimurad, and I would like to welcome you to this week's episode of Beauty Independence in Conversation webinar series, Spotlight Edition. This program is brought to you with the help and hard work of two of my great co-producers, Jane the General Carlson and Alexia Ali Gutierrez Spear, who, despite COVID and major power outages this week, worked hard every day to produce this great webinar for us. So special thanks to Ali for all of her hard work this week. All right, if you are new to the show, we strongly encourage you to use a large screen to enjoy this program, such as a desktop or laptop computer, because we'll be sharing a lot of content. Now, you will probably have some questions, and that's perfectly fine. But keep in mind that you're muted. So if you want to post your question, make sure that you use the chat function in Zoom, and our panelists, time allowing, will do their best to address your questions. And while you're in the chat section, please don't use it for self-promotion. That is a big no-no and can get you thrown off the webinar. The only people and the only company that's allowed to promote themselves is Europelab, who happens to be the sponsor of this webinar. So Sarah, go ahead, promote Europelab on chat as much as you want. It's all yours, my friend. And finally, if you want to watch a replay of this or share it with friends or colleagues, you're more than welcome to do so, because we will be sending a full audio and video recording within 24 hours of its completion. Now, today we are in episode 2 of the 3-part series that we're doing thanks to Europelab. In episode 1, before the end of the year, we covered general skin health. So our panelists, actually led by Manon, who's back with us today, talked about the general physiology, structure of the skin, the common problems, types of products. Then we talked about different category of products and how to think about product development in skin health. And then we had a case study from Protégé Labs, who developed a skincare product over the past 2 years and recently launched it. In fact, they were so kind, they sent me a bottle, and I have been using it, and it is amazing. And what we're going to do this week is take it a step further, go a little bit more detailed by looking at the first of 2 subcategories in skincare. And today we're going to focus on feminine hygiene products. This is a category that has experienced enormous interest and growth. And we're going to talk about why that's happening. And then next week, 2 weeks from now, actually, we're going to talk about SPF and acne care, which are another subcategories in skincare that are seeing tremendous growth. Now, this whole webinar, everything is brought to you thanks to our sponsor, Europelab, which is a division of Derme & Co. And they're a full-service formulation, contract manufacturing, consulting. They have a range of capabilities. And what's really special about them really is 3 things, in my opinion. First is they know how to work with small brands. Europelab actually was established to work with smaller brands because they understand that when you're a small company, you don't have the resources and you may need a little bit more help than the average large client. Second thing about Europelab is, despite themselves being a small company, they have access to their parent company's much larger capabilities, which includes a range of facilities meeting the highest regulatory standards, both in North America and in Europe. So they can produce products for you for pretty much any of the major markets. And then finally, they have developed incredible range of expertise, whether it's about ingredients and formulations around developing products in skincare. So whether it's spa-grade products or physician-grade products, they can do that, all the way to perhaps more run-of-the-mill products that you would want to put in a retail area. So you have all those capabilities. Give my good friend Sarah a call. She's an incredible person and she'll be more than happy to help you. All right, for today, when we're going to talk about feminine hygiene, we have 3 panelists, each bringing a different perspective. Manon is going to kick us off. And what Manon is going to do is really lay the foundation around why is the vaginal skin different than other areas of the body. It's a unique organ. Actually, the more we researched this in preparation for the webinar, the more I began to appreciate some of the incredible properties of that organ as it has to function in many different ways. There's actually a range of things that it has to do, which really no other part of the body can or has been able to do. And so in order to do that, it has evolved in a particular way. And Manon is going to walk us through that. And she's going to in particular talk about the importance of the microbiome down there, the importance of pH balance. And then she's going to walk us through some of the common problems and complications women experience. And she's going to touch on some of the hero ingredients that can help as you're looking at developing products to address those needs. Then we're going to switch gear, but we're going to stay in Canada because Julie Chamberlain, CEO of Sweet Spot Labs, is a brand that's been around since 2003, but recently has seen great traction. The fact that they were able to get Julie out of L'Oreal is a great example of that. But what Julie's going to talk about is really how to think about products in this category. How's the market segmented? What are the different range of products? And then what she's also going to touch on are, from a commercial perspective, what are some of the product development principles that you need to keep in mind, and some of the go-to-market considerations that you have to also have in mind, because this market's a little bit complicated, and it's not just regulatory issues, there's also communication issues, which Julie lives and breathes every day. Finally, my good friend and nemesis, Claire McCormick, we love each other, we hate each other, mostly love each other, right, Claire? Who is an editor at Beauty Independent. And Claire has been following this category ever since she started at Beauty Independent in 2017. She's genuinely passionate about women's health and feminine hygiene and feminine personal care. She's covered all the major brands, all the big trends, and she is very much at the forefront of knowing what's happening and what's coming next. And that's what she's going to talk to us about, is what's happened here and what is like to come next, so that we get a full picture of this market. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing and pass the baton to Manon. All right, Manon, you're up.
I'm up. All right, so thank you. Thank you very much for the intro. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. Well, what a subject. An interesting subject for me. I've been really into the research and development of product formulation for quite some time. I want to say more than 25 years. And this category is quite complex. I'm very excited to share everything, at least a small amount of information in that 20 minutes. All right. So today we're going to talk about the unique attribute. We're going to talk about the importance of balance of the microflora, often called microbiota, or the common problem, as well as a hero ingredient. So if we look, we're just going to go like slowly. We know that the main function of the vagina, so if we look at it, we know that mainly it's immune defense, right? That's what one of the main function. The second one is menstruation, sexual function, and reproduction, as well as the canal for childbirth. So that's what we know, right? We know that it has different role. So of course, it has to be available as an open cavity. It has to allow the passage and receipt of different fluids, so in and out, maintain optimal moisture level, and as needed, it has to be obviously flexible and at time, of course, more tight. So especially in the menopause period. We know that, as a result, the vagina is exposed to a variety of pathogen. We're going to cover pathogen in a whole wide area, because that's one of the area that product development is key. So you're going to learn a lot more about the pH and how it all actually interferes with the symbiosis of basically the microbiomes. And then the ideal environment for pathogen growth, what is it that we need in order, to develop the product? We need, to have a healthy balance and at risk for stress and injury, even degenerative conditions that we find. So over time, the vagina has evolved, of course. We know that it self-protects, thank God. We don't actually need product when we're healthy. We don't need product at all. So people like us that do formulation, we wouldn't need to be there. But unfortunately, because of so many factors we're going to hear, we're going to need. We have, of course, a self-cleaning and maintaining system. It's based on symbiotic relationship between the microorganisms. So the ones that I want you to remember the most is the pathogen, right? The bad ones. And in the bad ones, there's the yeast that converts into mold. And then we have the good bacteria that we want, like the lactobacilli bacteria. So there's the yeast and the bacteria category. So all of them have to live in good symbiosis. And of course, they're all linked and in balance with the development of hormones. So basically, due to menopausal symptoms, we have issues and everything fluctuate. The same thing when we have our menstruation. So let's look quickly on the skin physiology. So if we look, we know that the hypodermis, bottom part of our skin, where the fat cells are, is thinner. We know that the dermis, the middle part of the skin, is more prominent. We have more blood vessels. So we know that there's more sebaceous gland. Of course, on the labia majora, that's another kind of key name to remember. So there's labia majora, which is the outer lip, and then the inner lip. So labia minora. So on the labia majora, we have more sebaceous gland, of course, because we have more hair. We know that there's more blood vessels. We said that, sorry, more vascularized. So we see that there's a lot more vascularization. So we have more sensitivity and more nerve ending. That's how we get some emotion. And of course, that's where we have stimulation. So it's good to know. But what I would like to focus a little bit more is, this entire biofilm, the composition where the microbiomes live and are supported within the stratum corneum layer. So the stratum corneum layer is the outer layer of the skin. We know that it's composed of 15 to 20 layers when they're all flattened and they're all dead cells, mostly non-permeable. They protect the underlying tissue, and they shed regularly. So when our regular corneum stratum looks like this, but when we look at a vaginal corneum stratum, so our SC, we know that there's kind of space, extracellular space. And what happens is that in the extracellular space, we have our bacteria and our yeast, or mold that lives there, the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, all this population. And what happens is that if we don't have that self-cleaning mechanism, we may have some issues, and especially issues with the pH, and then you're going to see the cascade of problems that we may have. So our vaginal stratum corneum, right, cells shed frequently. We know that the entire layer cells shed every 4 hours. So from the skin, it just moves up and it sheds. So thank God to that when it's healthy, when it's in good condition. And of course, to detach the skin, and it's rich in glycogen. So glycogen is a form of sugar, and that's what our bacteria and our yeast feeds from. So the good bacteria we want to remember is the lactobacilli bacteria. So the lactobacillus bacteria, excuse my French. So this is the one we want to remember the most. So we have a lot of population when we're healthy. And you're going to see that, of course, the higher the concentration of our sweat gland and the vaginal skin, we also know that the lubrication, or all the humidity, as well as a good balance of lubricants, if you'd like, are contribute as well from the Bentheline's gland. So it's right next to the opening of the vagina, and it releases some secretion, and that's what creates our natural moisture. So that's the good thing. And these bacteria lives in that moisture, if you'd like, and that's what we call biofilm. When it's healthy, it's a biofilm, and or we call it, a thin film of mucus or flora. So there's different names, so we just want to clarify. So we know that it's like the population of those microbiomes, the yeast, the bacteria, good ones, bad ones, they all live within those dead cells, all trapped in between, and with that moisture. So from the sebaceous gland, from the sweat glands, as well as from the Bartholin glands. That's unique specifically within the vagina area. So what we need to know is that in the, of course, the environment of the lactobacillus propagates. And what happens is that they're the one, they actually feed from basically the glycogen, right? We said that earlier. And the beauty is that it produces lactic acid. So that lactic acid is what is necessary to have a healthy pH. Let me go back. So what we want to remember as women is we should take a pH test of our vaginal flora, of that biofilm, if you'd like. You insert, it's a gynecology pH paper, like a litmus paper. And you insert and you just measure your pH. And then if you're between 3.8 and 4.1, you are healthy and there's no problem, and you don't need any products. Well, unless you want to firm, tighten, if you have other opportunity stimulates, and so on. But if we're looking at a younger person, and if the pH is at 3.1 to 4.1, you are healthy. And we say thank you to the bacillus bacteria, because those are the one creating that acidity, because they cause that, they produce that lactic acid that keeps that pH healthy. Then, of course, the acidic zone contains that population of microorganisms that are non-pathogenic. And in other words, if it's acidic, you don't have those pathogenic bacteria. It doesn't mean that if it's acidic, you don't have the yeast that, because we all have yeast, we said earlier, those Candida albicans are called, it's like our yeast microorganism or microbiomes. And basically when they live in there, they just need to not be in an environment where the pH is too alkaline. So as soon as it becomes more alkaline, then we have problems, and we'll see the problems that we get. So pH 3.8 to 4.1 is key. As soon as it goes to 4.2, you have potential bacterial pathogenic activity taking place, and that's becoming a problem. So when we say that the lactobacilli bacteria also produce an antimicrobial peptide, so it's almost like your little guard. I like to look them as soldiers. So if we don't have that bacteria in high quantity, not only are we not going to have our acidity, our pH that is balanced, so other intruders like bad bacteria will start to grow, but on top of it, we're not going to have full protection, full immunity. So this is why it's important to always have a higher count of the lactobacilli bacteria. So imagine in formulation, all these little things to consider, right? So of course, a lot of things can happen. A variety of factors can reduce the presence of lactobacilli. So how is it that when we're young, we keep ourselves healthy and we don't have any problems? Here it is. So first of all, drink a lot of water. So we say 1.5 liters of water per day is necessary in order to keep moisture hydrated, because dehydration automatically make that biofilm, it alters the biofilm. The same thing with the antibiotic. So if you're under antibiotic, we all know we kill not only the bad bacteria, we kill good ones, so lactobacilli as well. So we have an issue and pH will go off. Other factors like diet, we eat too much sugar. Well, yeast and mold feed from sugar. Same thing with the bad bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, we call them the bad ones. They feed from sugar. So we don't want to have too much sugar in our diet, including alcohol. Lack of sleep can actually affect having more growth, if you'd like, of those mold or yeast. Stress, we found that in pandemic, we see a lot more candidosis than ever before. Why? Because we're so stressed out, we eat a lot more sweets, and then everything goes off and our pH is not balanced and this population gets unbalanced. And unfortunately, we start developing a lot of serious problems. And then a varieties of chemicals can alter your pH. So, we go to, for example, the pool, the chlorine will affect your pH. Maybe you won't be affected, but in my case, due to my mother's genetic heritage, I will be affected right away. So I need to regulate my pH, otherwise I will have candidosis. I will have yeast infection, as an example. So it's kind of nice to know that certain individual will has more count of those Candida albicans than others, and have more counts of the lactobacillus bacteria. So it's an interesting concept. Chemicals like sulfate, we all use soap, or we sit in a bath, bubble bath. Well, that bubble bath, the sulfate will, kill your pH, because of course that's more alkaline, and it's going to destroy the good, healthy bacteria and the symbiosis of the balance of our bacteria and mites. Not mites, but yeast. The same thing when we look at chemicals in products, like we said, sulfate, silicone, we find sometimes in lubricants, chemicals like CMRs, we want to stay away from the CMRs, anything, silicone, sulfate, chemical preservatives, dyes, chlorine, I said that, like some women will use, that alters your pH, and that's pretty bad. Tight clothing, we always, those tights is nice, or G-strings, well, they alter your pH. Any friction or anything that cause heat or sweat will allow those pathogens to grow and alter your pH and cause damage. So as the level of lactobacilli drops, obviously you produce less lactic acid. So that's when the problem starts to occur. So we need to keep this pH all time. But if we, of course, we have lower level of lactic acid, then our pH rise and then problem happens. So pathogen bacteria, the BV, develops, and we wonder what's going on. So people that are predisposed or genetically predisposed to more BV or yeast infection need to have this information, and you'd be surprised that 1 woman out of 3 will have this problem. I'd like to say 1 out of 2, but this goes by the studies. So it's interesting. Of course, it causes major problems because those, toxins, neurotoxins, endotoxins, cause inflammation, itching, abnormal discharge, pain, odor, long-term, of course, health hazards, and even degenerative conditions, disease. So we need to know that those microbiomes, when they're pathogen, they're very harmful for us. Not just, don't wait till just we have a discharge and we wait to treat it. It's actually maybe affecting your health. So we need, this is why the category of cosmetics has grown so much. There's so much opportunity. But I'd like to say that in formulation, as a R&D director, I have to tell you, there's so much that we need to know before you formulate, because you can alter that pH. So what can go wrong if we look at overall? Well, of course, dryness. We know that at menopause, which usually is around age 51, perimenopause before or around 51, you develop, you have that hormonal imbalance. When you have that hormonal imbalance, it affects your estrogen. Your estrogen affects your overall hydrolipidic factor. When that happens, you have dryness. So you have issue. Right away, your lifestyle is completely changed. It's not only on your humor and your bloating and everything else, but it affects your skin. So we need to treat the condition. Pigmentation. Some people will have hyperpigmentation. We know that we've learned in the previous session that the melanogenesis process takes place right here at the basal germinative layer. So we know that if we have an hyperpigmentation or an abundant pigmentation, some women won't like it. So the labia minora or majora, they would want bleaching. Well, okay, if you develop ourselves as a laboratory, Europelab, when we develop, or the laboratory as a mother company, we know for a fact that if we're going to do a bleaching product, we should consider a pH balance right after and educate the client. Don't just produce a bleaching product because without balancing that pH, right? So that makes kind of sense. So it's kind of nice to know. Sensitive skin, of course, there is a sensitive skin developing with age, with hormones. So that needs to be considered. So some skin, even on the labia minora, majora, they do the shaving, they do waxing, or all forms of depilatory systems, and it causes a lot of sensitivity. So we need to treat it accordingly. There's so much opportunity there, and also make sure that we develop product that will respect the sensitivity of the capillaries, of the arterial microcirculation. And then comment on acne, because especially at the labia majora, that's where we're concerned with acne or cystic component, is because we have the sebaceous gland, right? And it produces that oil. And if we have the bacteria called Propionibacterium acne, that bacteria lives happily in symbiosis on the epidermis structure of your skin, labia majora, the outer lip. And what happens is that when you have a higher concentration of that Propionibacterium acne, you develop acne, you develop cystic components, you can develop folliculitis, and of course, leading to ingrown hair. So there's so much opportunity just in that area that we can really consider because we want to look good. It's becoming with internet, so there's so much opportunity there on just the look, on the not just the feel, but then we have to measure the consequence of all these chemicals maybe that are affecting your pH. And then of course, laxity of skin. Laxity of skin, the skin tone and your muscle tone in age, especially menopause, are affected. So you may develop some products that will do that skin tightening. Then again, always consider to rebalance the pH, because when we work with stimulating active ingredients, they might be altering your pH of your skin. So you always have to be mindful that when you develop a product, consider that these bacteria and yeast needs to live in symbiosis and not be affected by your treatment of skin tightening, because it's so popular. Vaginal skin tightening for the last 15 years, I would say, has been really a popular a treatment that women, are considering. And there's so many technologies and surgical procedures that have became, very popular. So other common concern we also see in product development is, of course, hydration. When you're young, you want to maintain that pH even after sexual activities. Sperm will alter your pH. So you want to make sure that this, I call it hydration, but really it's pH balancing. Freshness, we all want to smell good and feel good. So when you use your cleanser, you want to make sure you don't use the sulfate, you use gentle products. Stimulation products will, that will be specifically for those nerve ending that you want to create that stimulation. So always be mindful of the pH balancing afterwards. The same thing with lubrication. So those are key elements or key points that are necessary. In conclusion, aero ingredients. I mean, I would need a full day or more, I think, to talk about ingredients, because every day we get solicited by new innovation. We work with different universities, so it comes and we have so much opportunity. So it wouldn't be fair to promote one ingredient versus another one. I just wanted to clarify this, because you may see this and say, okay, I'm going to buy this for this, particular product. Well, no. So hydrolytes, we use, for example, aloe vera, you use chamomile, you use hawthorn. We use things that are, ingredients that are very calming or soothing. We want to encourage prebiotic when you do your formulation. Prebiotic could be by oligosaccharides, for example, or chicory. Evening primrose, baobab are key ingredients for skin tightening with arginine. Red seaweed for lightening the skin, it's more gentle, but of course your alpha hydroxy acid, your glycolic, if you're going to use those alpha hydroxy acid with low pH, it's good low pH, but again, try to always maintain that 3.8 to 4.1 when at the end of the treatment. Tea tree, again, thyme, rosemary, calendula, there's different antiseptic or antibacterial essential oils that will, can play a great role. But again, it's all into where is the extracted from, what's the concentration, what's the method of extraction, and how it's actually put together. That's going to make a difference, of course. And using surfactants that are gentle, that are organic, not using any of those sulfates that can really harm not only the environment, but of course, your body and your pH. Let's talk about pH. So I hope that this was informative for you.
Manon, thank you very much. A couple of quick questions for you. What are some of the common mistakes you see companies make when developing products in this area? Is it around ingredients? Is it how they put the ingredients in a formula? What are the basic mistakes people make?
I think the biggest mistake is that they go see a manufacturer that have no experience and knowledge of the skin. I think that's how I would roll it over, because, ingredients, when you have the knowledge of the skin and how it works, chemistry, cosmetic chemistry is very complex, and there's so much opportunity. And, sometimes consumers will look at percentage and say, if there's a higher percentage, well, as a matter of fact, that percentage may be not good for you or hurting you. So it depends on how and the concept of the study of cosmetic chemistry and how it's actually put together and understanding the skin. I think if you have all of this, that's the number one, because if they produce a product that's going to hurt, imagine it's your brand, it's your name. Imagine you go see a manufacturer and they produce something for you that you can actually harm on the long term the health of the individual. I mean, you're responsible. So I really believe that stay cosmetics, as an advice is stay cosmetics and deal and work with a factory or laboratory, that will understand the skin and also, of course, the formulation.
So let me ask you a naive question. I mean, if I go to a company that makes hand soap, you're telling me that they won't have a cosmetic chemist on board, that they're just, help me understand.
No, if they just do hand soap, it doesn't mean they don't have the knowledge. They may have the knowledge. I don't want to say anything good or bad. I'm just saying educate yourself, find out who they are and what they've developed, and maybe most we have to do a little bit more research and find out with who we want to work with, not just a company that's a contract manufacturing, just a contract to make products. It's more than that today. 40 years ago maybe I would have talked differently, but today we have so much knowledge. It's just
well,
incredible.
that's what I was kind of getting at, is after listening to your presentation, is I don't want to go to someone just a cosmetic chemist. I want to go to someone who knows this specific area, who's up to speed on the literature and the latest science around this area versus, I don't know, the hand or the skin somewhere else in the body or the scalp. Last question, Manon. What are some of you touched on a few innovations, hero ingredients. A lot of brand founders are looking for cleaner, greener formulas. A lot of the things you showed seem to be pretty clean and pretty green. Are you satisfied with the range of ingredient options available to brands today to get really good products out there? I
definitely say that we've evolved. I mean, we've been working with organic certified ingredients since 1992. I mean, we were natural ingredients, for more than 25 years. More than 50 years, if I calculate all years. But the organic certified one is a little bit more difficult to find, but we have a lot more choices than we ever had in the last 2 years. So we have a lot more to source with. And I would say, especially for the vaginal area, go with organic, be mindful by selecting, not only worrying about the environment, but worrying specifically about the woman's health. And women's health, it's absorbent down there. The vagina, the lining, the biofilm that
permeable,
perfect absorption canals. So we make sure we use ideally.
In our last webinar, you mentioned just because something is natural doesn't mean it's good for you. You brought the example of that bergamot oil, right? So just being organic or being nature derived doesn't mean it's still safe to be used down there. So you kind of need to further have the knowledge of actually what ingredient deck, what profile works for that area based on the pH balance and microflora, et cetera, et cetera. Great.
Yeah, and also the objective, right? The objective, what you're trying to achieve, because of course, all of that is important to know before we develop the product. And then if we are going to cause damage, like bleaching, if we're going to cause damage, we need to fix the damage. To be mindful to say, okay, we're going to do a treatment series or product, everyday use for this amount of use. But after that, you stop. And then you're going to go and fix, but we have to have the knowledge, I guess.
Great. Well, we're going to go to the hot, humid, coconut tree lined streets of New Brunswick, Canada.
That's right. You can see out my window right now. It's completely the opposite.
Is there a moose out there? Do you have like a friendly family
Gary,
moose?
Gary, he's just in the driveway. He comes by sometimes.
All right, great. We're going to switch over to Julie, who's going to kind of provide the more commercial perspective around this topic. So Julie, over to you.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Manon. That was so much value. So I hope to bring as much, if not close to as much value to everyone. So I'm Julie. I'm the CEO of Sweet Spot Labs. And what I'll be going over in my portion is really talking firstly about some anatomy. So what are the areas of needs? Manon went into it, and I'll go into it in a little bit more descriptive visual perspective. And that will help to lay the foundation for a way to look at the market, not the way, because I think the good news and the fun aspect is that all together, I think we're developing or redefining what that can look like, but a way of looking at the market today by area and also by need and like function and form, if you will. And then we'll talk about a few product development priorities or principles that you might want to consider, whether you're investing in or commercializing within this exciting category, and some go-to-market considerations as well. So let's get right into it, the areas of need. So let's look visually at what we're talking about, because I'm going to be using two words that are very different, which is the vulva and the vagina. And don't worry if you don't know the difference, because I was 41 when I learned the difference myself, which altogether we need to change, because the more you know, the more you can advocate for your pleasure or champion for your pain. And I think altogether promote better products that are correctly positioned, which is really important. So what is the vulva? The vulva is the thing that most often gets mistaken for the vagina, and it's not the same thing. So the vulva is everything that basically is external and that you see. Maybe that definition of external or being able to be seen has to be manipulated a little bit. There might be some tugging and pulling, but basically we're talking about everything that's external from the mons, which is where, the most of your, or a lot of your pubic hair grows, to the clitoris, to the labia that Manon was speaking about, and everything sounds so much better with a French accent, to your vaginal opening. Some textbooks even refer to the anus as the vulva, just to make sure that we're encompassing everything, again, to make sure that we're empowered and advocating for all aspects of our anatomy down there. So this is much different than the vagina, which is also what Manon introduced us a lot to, which includes the opening and the cervix. I mean, there's no nerve endings here. There are a lot of similarities. They work together for a lot of the reasons that Manon pointed out, but also very different in very many aspects. And so wanted to make sure that we were clear on which is which as we look at the framework that we've developed here. So we're going to talk a bit about all things that are external. So vulva, you can remember that with the triangle V, all things internal. And then we've put as a third axis menstrual care, which of course can physically be addressed both on the outside of the vulva and of course on the inside, depending on which method you choose. So we made that its own category. So we have developed this framework that talks about this area or application of need, and also on the other viewpoint, what are some of the main benefits or things that you're looking to solve, and what are the forms. But let's talk about commercially, like how we can think about the differences between each three. So for external use, the vulva. This one is, I would say probably most similar, and Manon, in the chat, you can feel free to challenge that perception or align to it. But I would consider the vulva as being most similar to other areas of our body, and the aspect of it being, that skin that was referenced often. So it's got, the same pH as the pH of the rest of our body skin. On the outer layers, like the mons, like a pH more of like a 5.5. It is skin, it's got a skin barrier, an acid mantle, all of the things, and we can see it, and hopefully we interact with it on a more often basis. And there's a lot of grooming and aspects and things like that. So I would say it's more similar, and perhaps because of that, it's also very commonly associated with beauty from a commercial aspect. So I mean that, this category that's more adjacent to the vulva has existed, it's probably the most legacy category that you'll find in mass retailers, and increasingly masstige and hopefully prestige as time goes on. However, the proximity to the vagina, of course, creates very unique needs. So as Manon said, first thing, ensure you know about skin, but ensure you know about skin that's going to be interacting with the vagina and has special needs. Because think about all that we know and invest in on our face as, vulva owners or not, also as, commercial people. And it's, I think, got a pretty fair deal, because the vulva is skin that has hair growing on it. That hair is coarser and thicker. It's constricted all day long. It's shaved and waxed often. So there's a lot more going on that it needs, and we hardly pay any attention to it, I would say, most often in the narrative. So there's still a lot of work to be done here. Then we go to internal canal. So, from a product development or commercialization perspective, we have to consider that this is a more regulated category. Most often, these would be considered, OTC products, which carry, different considerations for your P&L, like all the way through to whether you have the capabilities to go to market with this kind of product. There are different, therefore, like a great thing is we saw that all of the harmful things that could happen if you don't know what we're doing, a lot of different standards that are mandated all across the life cycle. And though I think the interesting thing is through innovation, becoming more associated with beauty via wellness, more in terms of either preventative or maintenance aspects. So how can we prevent or maintain our vaginal health, for instance? And you start to see these new categories, like I'll pick supplements as an example, in traditional retail today, and in the beauty narrative, in editorial and beyond. And then we have menstrual care. So until recently, right, that's been along maybe with some part of the vulva care market, which we would traditionally define as hygiene. mostly mass products, the legacy, kind of category, and it's mostly been the kind of standalone. But this is a great opportunity for brands that are focused on feminines or wellness overall, whether it's, pre-menstruation or post or during, up to you, depending. And it's also starting, thank goodness, with all the innovation from a lot of the amazing indie brands to become aligned with beauty and wellness and give people more options for how they want to menstruate than just, what existed for so long. So then we'll take a look, now that we understand those three columns, at what product categories sort of exist today. And again, this is not, the end all be all, it's a framework to start the conversation. And I think what will be interesting is how we can, elevate this and bring it further. But the first one we'll start with is what we are calling everyday essentials. So again, that's, the categories in here would be the more legacy or traditional ones. This is what most people think of. So if I'm going to raise, a fundraise, and I'm talking about what we're doing, most people are going to think this is where we play and that's it, because this is what people think exists primarily today, like what you'll find at a Walmart or the CVS, or if you're in Canada, like a Shoppers Drug Mart. And luckily, there's a lot of innovation going on here and so much more beyond here. But this is the traditional, pH balanced cleansers, in different points of view, either pH balanced to the vaginal canal or pH balanced to vulvar skin, somewhere along that range, like all great options, wipes, toners, things to help both with cleansing and respecting a healthy skin barrier, respecting your pH balance. Why not use it from chin to toe? But also to help if odor and freshness is on your priority, and you're feeling empowered and not shamed, marketed into it. There's a lot of great options for that today, and I'm really glad that that narrative is evolving as well. And we're really developing products, with people like that are on this call, and all of these new innovators to come that are really thinking about the needs and not just the marketing opportunities, which I think, unfortunately, a lot of the category sort of was developed in that way up until now. And then beyond that, as I mentioned, beyond the traditional ways of menstruating, we have a lot of new innovations where it concerns cups and so on, and cleansers for those devices, as well as period underwear. So then we go on into maintaining comfort. So I'll start to use maybe some personal examples. It's Friday and I'm feeling frisky, so I hope it's not too much TMI, but we'll talk about some examples here, because otherwise it won't really be relevant, especially if you're not a vulva owner and you've never experienced these things. So what do I mean by maintaining comfort? Well, one of them could be moisture replenishment. I think Manon gave some great examples where it concerns, vulvar care. So I don't think I've worn, real pants like in 2 years with all of these COVID restrictions. So if you're wearing a lot of yoga pants behind the Zoom call and you're more constricted, there could be chafing, there could be irritation, you could get more dry. It could also be, as my estrogen was fluctuating during, the births and postpartums and breastfeeding of my 3 children, my moisture, got lower, and having, for example, a vulvar serum or something like that to help work as a protectant to the skin barrier against, the clothing I'm wearing, or just to help replenish moisture, is amazing. Also, because of those 3 children, I can't go on my, 10K or 5-mile run without peeing a little bit these days. So incontinence care, gets really important, not just, for later on, but already. So these are kind of just a few examples of, external uses on the vulva, as well as really exciting things that are happening internally for, maintaining comfort in terms of, for example, pelvic health and pelvic floor health specifically, and all of the great benefits that exist there, concerning your sexual wellness, concerning bladder control, concerning so many things, and new at-home ways to help strengthen and improve the health of that, as well as, as an example, supplements to help maintain comfort during and throughout menstruation. After that, we have a category that we're defining as soothing and treating. So what do I mean by that? Well, we've talked a lot of times between the two of us so far about how fundamentally at the end of the day, we're talking about skin. It's not some like unknown, thing that's going on down there that we don't understand. And a lot of the things that can happen to the rest of your skin can happen down there. I mean, unfortunately, I'm sure if you're going to a derm and talking about the dermatitis that's happening somewhere else, they might not be asking you if it's happening on your vulva, but often it is. A contact dermatitis on the vulva, like vulvar dermatitis, is actually way more common than we think or than we talk about. And that's just one example. So if you're having a dermatitis, you might need something that's either an OTC or cosmetic, and that's just, ultra nourishing, and it's also going to help improve your skin barrier health and or help with the side effects of that, like itch or irritation, as a for instance, which we can see here in the vulva care products. Internally, soothing and treating, we mean, helping with those yeast infection. Hopefully you never get them, because now it's like, the more you know, maybe you could help avoid that. But if you're having a yeast infection, if you want to help with the side effects of bacterial vaginosis that were outlined, this is where we start to talk about the OTC categories for internal use. And then soothing and treating, let's call them the side effects of hormonal fluctuations throughout our cycles. Then we have probably the other one that's most widely known after everyday essentials, but I think that is getting more sophisticated. So grooming. So we all know kind of about shaving, although great, again, brands are innovating here from a cultural narrative. But I think we're seeing more innovation and excitement in terms of, ingrown hairs. More people know what folliculitis is, and that there are treatments to help solve them. Dark spots, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, and firming. So all mostly to do on this axis with the vulva. And then sexual wellness, and we have an expert in there who will delve more into it, but I'll just point out a few things, which is, of course, all of the things that we might kind of right away consider for external use. So, but I think that there's even more, then, of course, there's the sexual pleasure aspect and stimulation and helping with lubrication. There's also, for example, gels and creams that can help us do perineal massage when we're pregnant and preparing for birth. That can help us in other areas as well, that I think is really exciting. Internally, a lot of great things to help bring more pleasure, to help in terms of safety on both sides of the sexes. And then, what happens when we're no longer menstruating? This is really an interesting area. Menon mentioned it briefly. I kind of think about it like estrogen is to the vulva vagina what collagen is to the face. So as our estrogen, is declining, this is where some, things really become, I think there's a lot going on in terms of, hyaluronic acid suppositories, or like different ways of bringing moisture replenishment to the vaginal canal, but also to the vulva, which has, potentially different forms to help with what is in a more extreme and chronic, like vulva dryness. Here we're talking about using creams every day, like you would, really on your face. So that's a framework to start thinking about what is the, intimate care, feminine hygiene, so many words to put on this category. What are all of the different need states and forms that can take? So then we'll go into, hopefully you're super excited, and this is a category you want to lean into, because I think a rising tide lifts all ships. So I welcome all that are coming with integrity, but some things to keep in mind. One is that the internal care is different, and I think Menon did the best job talking about this, so I won't go into it too much. But maybe not even from a product development point of view, but again, a positioning point of view. So we do a disservice to women if we don't call the things correctly. Like if it's not a vaginal wash, don't call it a vaginal wash, because women are going to put it up there and they're going to disrupt their pH balance, and so many other things can happen. So internal care, has different needs, but congratulations for being at these kinds of forums to educate, to ensure that we we respect that. The second thing is that, for example, if menstrual care is something that excites you, one thing to think about is that the COGS here are key, and that's from two perspectives. One is from the perspective of the consumer. So this is a replenishment category. If you've been in beauty a long time, you could think about it like hair color, or hair care like a shampoo. That's a replenishment category if you choose it to be, but for most it is. And therefore there's usually like a ceiling, like a different ceiling that people are going to put on it, especially if it's something that actually you don't always probably usually, unless that's an innovation you can create, but most often we can't choose whether it's replenishing or not. We're going to menstruate. And so there's, a different kind of elasticity there. It's can be a bit more commoditized depending on the category, like paper, as a for instance. Also, there's, less manufacturers that are FDA approved to actually manufacture them. And so that puts like a different pressure on your COGS. Anyone that runs a P&L will argue with me that COGS are always important, but I think it's a different, dynamic here to consider. I would add, and I think though that maybe this goes without saying at this point, that external care is not simple. If you took, anything away from Manon's presentation as well, it's that it's not simple. And so encouraging, the right research, the right partners, all of the things that we've talked about to ensure that we're not unintentionally causing an unintentional consequence through the types of products that we develop or the types of products that we develop in tandem with them to ensure it is a holistic care. The fourth is that ingredient selection is key. And here, I mean, it's kind of similar, but I'm going to give like a little bit of a dramatized example, but can be a real example. And we do hear things like this from women of kind of that flare cycle that we talk about that can happen when you cause an imbalance. So here's just like a hypothetical situation. A consumer, is like, something's going on down there. I'm feeling different. I smell different. I'm going to go out and buy a wash. And that, maybe she buys a wash, or that vulva owner buys a wash that has like a high level of fragrance, or just, something in maybe it's a sulfate that's in the formula. She gets a contact dermatitis. Most people don't know that that can happen on your vulva. You get kind of itchy. Most people think itch equals yeast infection. So then she goes out, let's say that it's a she in this instance, she goes out and she suspects a yeast infection. She gets an OTC product for yeast. Now she's gone, she's totally swung her pH the other way. She didn't really need it in the first place. That maybe causes bacterial vaginosis. And then, her symptoms become even worse. And this kind of stuff happens, with lack of resources of knowing what's going on. And so I just encourage everyone to understand that. And again, just to equip yourself to work with the right partners to create the right products to avoid these situations. The last part, and of course, at Sweet Spot Labs, I guess maybe this is where I'll go with this as well. I would say, there was a question about kind of the clean list. And I think this as well can be a subjective thing, but I think make it a choice. So, research and, we could debate, for example, should glycerin be in a vulvovaginal product? Is it a yeast trigger or not? But make it the choice of yours to decide whether you think it is or not, and leave it out or not. Should propylene glycol be in a lubricant? As a consumer, I don't want it. It was the 2018, allergen of the year, but, make it an informed choice whether to put it in your product or not, versus like, this is a hot market, I want to go after it, and so on, right? So the last thing is, I think the second last thing, if I remember well, is really ensure to budget safety tests. The number one thing we hear from consumers of these products is that they're looking, barrier to entry. They want to know that it's a safe product. And I think that not only from an integrity standpoint, but also just from a consumer point of view, fundamental to have, third-party lab, hopefully gynecologically validated safety tests to ensure that on the one hand, there's no irritant, to the skin, that there's no visible reaction going on. And if it's an OTC product, obviously that will be part of the process. But if it's a cosmetic product, I would definitely embed it into the product development cycle and costing. The last thing, and I think we've discuss this, I can go quickly, is really work with experts, but not only from, a formulation point of view, but also from, a medical point of view, to really understand like what can those consequences be, what are the unmet needs today, and manufacturing to get the right ingredients, and also that, for example, if it is OTC product, to make sure they're GMP certified, to really, do the research to ensure that end to end, you have the team at place that can help you bring this to market with no unwanted surprises. So then go to market, the last piece here. So if we think about this on three, axes: consumer, communication, and brand. some challenges that we experience in this category. One is, just a level of awareness and understanding, and therefore potentially mismanaged expectations of the parts. You could have, consumers searching for vaginal itch when in fact they mean, vulvar itch. You could go to your gynecologist and say you have vaginal itch. It'd be like me saying something's happening in my mouth versus like on my face. That's a pretty huge difference. So, it's a challenge and an opportunity, of course, but it definitely exists today. The anatomy, understanding what really is the need state, what really are you looking for as a benefit. And what makes that compounded is so much, censorship in terms of communication. So, all of the, if you've worked in beauty before or other consumer products, you have a playbook, probably a lot of those platforms that you might want to take with you. And there's just some nuances because we're not able to talk about the vulva or vagina directly on them. Content gets suppressed on Amazon, often, as a for instance. And so really that's something to keep in mind. And then from a branding point of view, again, some challenges, can be even internal in terms of finding the right talent that know this area, even if they have a lot of experience in skin or in beauty, and understanding what really are those unmet needs. We can't always ask consumers, to innovate for us, but I think it's an even bigger challenge in this category, and really. Luckily, we have a lot of open-minded people here, but it's not always the case either. Whether it's in investment as well. So some key success factors, therefore, to consider are, education about, on the category, like on women or vulva owners in and of themselves, and to help develop the category, again, because the rising tide lifts all ships. Advocacy, so the more we work together to get out of censorship on, advertising platforms and beyond. Also, maybe some level of patience, however, because that could take a while. But I think the more ad dollars we have all together and the bigger we create this category, the more likely we are to move beyond these silly things. And access to experts. So thank you to Beauty Independent for providing these kinds of experts to people. I think that's a great resource. Market research that you can get your hands on, like a Klein report, is a good place to go in order to help you, understand where you can best play in terms of the different sizes of the market, because that information isn't as available as it is for some others. And making sure to build the right culture internally so that your employees are always learning, as we are learning as a collective more about women's health and wellness, so that they're keeping on track of that, and they have the culture to continue to learn aside, say when they don't know, but also champion these important issues and create like a culture of safety and trust so that we can have these discussions. And I think that's it for me.
Julie, thank you very much. Quick question before we have 2 minutes before we move to Claire. Having come into this role at Sweet Spot, and you've worked with, you were at L'Oreal for many years, you've kind of done the rounds. What is it that you've learned in your time there at Sweet Spot that perhaps surprised you or was different, or you were kind of weren't expecting that to be a learning? Anything that comes to mind?
That's a really good question. And he did not give this to me in advance, or I'd have.
I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm kind of just throwing it at you. We got to stir it up. You and Manon are so prepared.
That's a good thing. I think that's a good thing.
Do it to Manon. She's part of the sponsor team.
So so two of the things I mentioned already. One is I had no idea the difference. I had no idea that, there was so much that I already knew about skin that I could apply, which is fascinating how little I knew about my own body, or only a very small percentage of it, which is the thing that everybody sees every day. But also how much women were really craving this education and this kind of community and having these conversations, how emotional the category really is. I kind of thought of it as really commodity and, transactional, and didn't really seem that sexy from a brand and business builder perspective or from a consumer perspective. But, it obviously has a lot of impact on your emotional life. It is the most sacred skin after all. And there is, how much innovation opportunity there was, I think, related to that, because I was kind of assuming, well, it's been around, kind of for a long time, there must be a lot of restrictions. And so really how much there is, and how passionate also there is of a community, like, some of the people on this call, and I would include Claire in that, as I've said before, about destigmatizing it. And I would include like gynecologists who are kind of like maybe, the next rise of the way we think about social derms, or, derms in general, and passionate about educating as well. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I'll tell you what's changed for me. I mean, having worked on this for 2 weeks now, and putting together the slides and the material, the first week, of course, the number of yeast infection ads I get on my Google browser now is just insane.
That's good. That's good.
Well, it is, but I probably should clear my browsing history. Anyway, last week when I was doing all this research, my wife walked in, and I have, of course, all these windows open with, just vaginas everywhere. And she just stood there looking. She was like, "Karen, tell me what's going on." I said, "Honey, I can explain. This is a project." Of course, these pictures weren't, they were medical grade, shall we say. But, I was a little embarrassed, but, went on. And then this week, as we were finishing up the project, my daughter came home, and I didn't realize that she'd come in the room as I was on the phone. And when I finished this, she was standing there drawing, and then she kind of, she's almost 6. She just offhand says, "Dad, what's that? What are you looking at? What are you talking about?" And and normally I would have been like, "Oh my God, what have I done? She's seen these things. I got to close it. Nothing, your mom will talk to you." Then I thought to myself, right, here's the problem. My reaction is going to determine how she feels about that part of her body. If I am embarrassed about it, if I refuse to acknowledge it, that it's a natural, normal thing, then in some subconscious way, it's going to affect her perception, because, a young age, they're very malleable. And so I just very, very calmly explained to her, I said, I'm doing a project. It's about the female reproductive system. She says, "What's reproductive system?" I said, "Well, it's where babies come from." And she said, and I explained to her that, this is when we give you a bath, we use that special soap for you to clean yourself. She's like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "That's it." And then we were done. Of course, she has far more important things to worry about, like how she's going to watch more Paw Patrol. Anyway, but it is interesting because, when you and I spoke, you said, Nader, one of the biggest problems we have is just finding the right words. As a marketer, I got to communicate with my customer. And if the key words are being locked up because people somehow find them inappropriate, well, how the hell can I have a conversation, a meaningful conversation with my customer, and get them to talk to me and help them to be educated, et cetera? And I think a lot of it starts with just changing cultural attitudes about these words. And as you said, not making people, in particular women, feel bad about what's completely natural about their bodies. There's nothing to be embarrassed there. It's, it's 51%. In fact, the majority of the population have a vagina. So Julie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to move to Brooklyn, New York, where my colleague Claire McCormick, sporting arguably an award-winning background, ladies and gentlemen, that is not digitally projected. That is actually where she lives. And she will be she'll be talking to us about trends and what's to come. Of course, Claire has now become very well known and a bit of a bigwig, so she doesn't do her own slides. So she said, "Nader, I'll do this webinar only under the condition that you be my slide jockey." So I'm honored today to be the slide jockey for Miss Claire McCormick. So Claire, shall we begin?
Yes, let's. Thank you so much. And thank you to Manon and Julie for just really wonderful information. I feel like I'm pretty well versed in this category, covering it as closely as I do, but I also learned so much. So thank you. And Julie, a lot of what you touched on really feeds beautifully into what I'm going to talk about. There'll be a little bit of overlap, but I'm going to look at it through a different lens. At Beauty Independence, these are my favorite stories to write. It's my favorite category to cover, and that's everything from feminine hygiene to sexual wellness, all of that. And that's a very good thing because it's a super exciting space right now. So there is no shortage of stories for me to write. And that includes the brands launching, funding happening. And this is all part of what I'm going to touch on. We're going to look at current trends, and then we're going to look at some future opportunities. And one of the biggest current trends and what's really driving all the growth and innovation is this shedding of the stigma status. Are we 100% there yet? Absolutely not. We have so much room to go, but it's gotten, even in the past 5 years, 10 years, and certainly if you look at 20 years ago, it's gotten so much easier for all people, but especially women, people with vulvas, people with vaginas, to talk about what their health, their wellness, what they need, issues, what they're dealing with. And that has really grown the category. And because that stigmas are being shed, here comes the venture capital funding. So in 2021, for the first time ever, institutional funding into the wider femtech space, which of course includes a lot more than just feminine hygiene, but it exceeded $1 billion for the first time ever, which is a big milestone to hit. And we've, at Beauty Independent, wrote about several of the brands there. Of course, money came, stigma shedding, and all these retailers woke up and said, well, if we can make money selling this stuff, like, hey, let's do it. And people who you would never, retailers that you would never expect to sell things like vibrators and period cups are selling them. And that's like people like Essence, which is a beautiful, beautiful Canadian retailer, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, literally name a retailer. And they have started to, including one that's going to news coming soon. They've started to carry some either in the feminine hygiene space, sexual wellness space, and this is a trend that's going to continue, as well as new retailers that are just for sexual wellness. You can look into Pepper in Las Vegas, opened up this massive, beautiful, super elevated sexual wellness and pleasure shopping experience at the new Resorts World in Vegas. So lots of exciting stuff happening there. And because of the stigmas being shed, and Julie did a beautiful job going into the categorization of the products, but because people are able, we have more language around this, we have more willingness to talk about it, the categories within feminine care, feminine health, feminine hygiene have gotten a lot clearer. And that really helps consumers get their problem solved. So if we look at period care, when I started menstruating, there was like an aisle 17B, and like at the bottom rung was like a little bit of, tampons and sanitary pads, and it wasn't really a great experience at all. And that has shifted so much, where period care has been elevated by brands to brands that like really more speak to consumers. And there's so many more options for pain. Women every month go through a lot. If you have like really severe menstrual cramps, there are brands that are coming out with solutions that go beyond just Midol, right? So I have a picture here of Ketish. That's the brand backed by Huda Kattan, and they launched, this is something that you can put on to help, you put it on your lower abdomen when you have cramps, and it really helps alleviate pain. And so it's really amazing to see brands innovating because consumers are able to say, hey, do you have something for this? Another category is pleasure, has been one of the most exciting categories within this to watch. So brands launching, there's a brand Cake launched into Walmart with, all sorts of vibrators and lube, which is really exciting to see. This brand Laurels, which actually stands for Love Oral Always, they're like dental dams. So a lot of people don't even know what dental dams are. They maybe not a lot of people use them, but these are underwear that you can wear that are very, very flexible. So you can use it if you want to engage in oral sex and don't want that like tongue on skin contact. Look into the brand, it's amazing. If you worry that you're not going to feel anything, they have several videos that will make it abundantly clear that you will absolutely feel what's going on. So a lot of innovation there as well. Another super exciting category is menopausal care. And again, this is something that wasn't really talked about. When I talk to brand founders in this space, they say how many times doctors that are on their boards, doctors who have founded their own brands say, yeah, we get very little education in medical school about menopause. No one knows. No one knows about perimenopause, how long it can take, when it can start, all the different, there are dozens of symptoms. And for so long, women have had such an almost non-existent arsenal of tools to deal with it. And brands are coming into the space and saying, no, this isn't it. Like, we are going to deal with hot flashes. We're going to deal with things like incontinence. We're going to deal with sexual pleasure and how that changes as we get older. And this was, again, Manon and Julie went and did a really beautiful job touching on the changes that can happen and how that can affect the vagina as we get older. And brands are really creating things that are beautiful. Womaness here launched an oversubscribed seed round. So they wanted to raise 3 million, they raised 4 million, went into Target with almost their entire line, and is selling really well. Then we have Hygiene and Vulva Care. Again, Sweet Spot Labs is here, and brands really coming with targeted products for the vulva. This is for the outside, and that are more maintenance, not just care, but also maintenance. So there's brands like Lady Sweet that make a vulva oil, and it's not saying, none of them are saying like there's something wrong to fix. It really is, are you caring for the skin down there? As has been said several times during the webinar, it's a very specific area, but it's also, I always call it like high traffic, okay? If you're sexually active, even as we're menstruating every month, like there's a lot going on down there. And so why would we totally ignore it? And brands have come to market, women-led brands, creating really beautiful, wonderful products that are for daily care and spot solutions for issues that come up. Grooming and deodorant solutions is probably the easiest for people to talk about because, like, okay, it's body hair. And what's been really interesting is watching as brands like Fur talk about not just removing hair, but okay, like, you want to have pubic hair, you don't want to get rid of it all. How do you take care of that hair? And that's, of course, still very stigmatized. They recently did all these billboards in LA and wheat pasting, which are those big posters that you see in New York and LA where it's just like stuck on a wall, and they were defaced because they showed women with pubic hair. And the founders took it in stride and said, you know what? If it has people talking about it and they go home and have a conversation like, I can't believe I saw it, then we got our job done. And this category is also particularly interesting because it's someplace that VC money and institutional money has really been pumped into on the deodorant. And there's a brand, Lume, that just got acquired by Harry's. So again, this is somewhere where there'll be a lot of movement because a lot of money is coming into that particular subcategory. Where all this innovation comes from, though, are founder-led brands, and the founders behind these brands, almost exclusively women, especially when we're talking about feminine health and hygiene. And so the innovations that they're bringing to the space, you can go to the next slide, sorry, are things like sustainability and clean consciousness, again, touched on earlier in the webinar. But when I first started buying things for my period, maybe one menstrual cup existed, and now there is a plethora of them. I don't know if organic cotton tampons existed, but they do now. So these companies, these founder-led companies, have brought so many different options to the market and let customers know that like they don't need to just buy Tampax. Like you have other, if you're looking for something that just like speaks to you more. If you want to, the DTC movement in period care has been amazing. As Julie said, this is a replenishable, like it's coming every month, right? And so the fact that there are brands like August that have come and like made it so easy to subscribe, to have a subscription, boom, it comes to my house every month. I don't have to worry about like, oh my gosh, do I have to run out to Walgreens right now to go get something in an emergency? Brands have really brought a lot of innovation there. New formats when it comes to specifically care and problem solving. I'll talk about Hello Again right here. They are a CBD and THC suppository. So we think of when we think of suppositories, we think of anal suppositories. These are vaginal suppositories, and they are made for women that have gone through menopause, and it helps with lubrication. It also helps with pain. And what's been interesting for them is they found that a huge amount of women that suffer from PCOS and endometriosis discovered their brand and their products, and have started using it for that with great success. So there are so many different brands that have come to market with completely new type of products. Again, if you think about, it wasn't that long ago when women had like Midol. And then when you were in menopause, you had like hormone replacement therapy, and just very few options when it came to dealing with the issues that were impacting your life on a daily basis. And women said, no, we're going to bring other things to market. There's lots of like transdermal patches that you could put either on your arm or even on your lower abdomen. And then the plethora of herbal supplements. So things that if you don't want to go the hormone replacement therapy route, what are the different herbs and minerals that you can take in supplement form to help relieve symptoms that you're dealing with. Brands in this space, and we're going to talk more about this. Again, Julie touched on this. Education is so lacking in women's reproductive health, sexual wellness in this country. You know, there's other parts of the world that are a lot better at it than we are, but brands in this category have an even bigger need to provide education to consumers. And they have really, really met that need in the most inventive ways. Keep in mind that these are often startup brands, they're bootstrapped. So these are not brands with just like tens of millions of dollars to like throw at a big educational initiatives. They're founder-led brands, but they have seen that their customers will come to them and know that they have an issue, but like, oh, I don't quite know what's going on. Again, Julie touched on this. And these brands have picked up that gauntlet and said, okay, we're going to provide the education for you. We're going to the brands have created Facebook groups. They have tens of thousands of people in them, where the brands will bring in experts, medical experts, doctors, health professionals to answer questions that consumers have in real time. And then consumers get to talk to each other. I'll bring up Julie's company, Sweet Spot Labs, does salon sessions where it's a more intimate group and people get to talk about what they're dealing with, and they'll be on specific topics about like women's health, reproductive health. And so it's just really beautiful to see and inspiring. And then we've watched these brands evolve themselves into beyond just period care brands. The brand Rael started with organic pads and tampons, and now they've moved into skincare, but kept it related, where it's skincare based on where you are in your cycle. And anyone who menstruates know that like their skin can be vastly different from day 1 of your cycle to day 15 to day 28. So they've looked at, okay, how do we expand our brand, staying true to taking care of women, but like what else can we provide for them? Okay, they made a whole bunch of pimple patches and sheet masks to help women with all their different needs at different points in their cycle. And brands have started to just be really loud and proud about being a brand in the feminine hygiene, women's health space, making merch. So we think of beauty merch like Glossier, but there's brands like Maria. She made a whole bunch of merch around the holiday time with It's a Mood, and you can see one of the O's is like made like a period, all in red. And I love her. Her name is Monica, the founder of the brand, and she doesn't call herself the CEO. She calls herself Chief Menstruator. So really just embracing and taking like the total 180 of like making this stigmatized and making this really a brand that like, I want you to know what type of tampons I use, which is just such a beautiful evolution. We'll look at future opportunities now, and there are a lot. Again, we've made so many strides in this space, but there's still so much room to grow. We could start first with looking at the money coming into the space. So $1 billion, amazing, exceeded $1 billion in 2021. But this is a category, if we look at femtech in general, it's hard to find stats on just like certain subcategories. If we look at femtech in general, which feminine hygiene is absolutely a part of, globally, this is a category that's it's estimated to reach around $70 billion in the next few years and grow at a rate of like 15 to 17 compound annual growth rate. I mean, if you follow industries, that's enormous. And so $1 billion is really nice, but it's really not enough. So we need more investors, more VCs, more angel investors to start opening their checkbooks and saying, yes, these are issues, these are products that, again, 51% of the population, this is not a niche category. Everyone needs to open their purses. And we also want to look at increased inclusion. So just the term feminine hygiene, how can we approach these products in this category in a way that includes everyone? If you are trans, if people may want to more be spoken to as like a person that menstruates, a menstruator, a person with a vulva, a person with a vagina. And so, and there's beautiful brands that are launching that encompass this. There's a brand called For Them, and they're all about bringing solutions to market for non-binary and trans people. They launched with an intimate oil. They make chest binders. And so I think that there's still a lot of room to grow when it comes to increasing inclusivity in this entire category. Julie touched upon the advertising access. I really recommend you all, if you're a nerd about this like me and in the industry, the Center for Intimacy Justice just this week published a report all about ads for female. It wasn't just sexual wellness, feminine hygiene, it was like female health, but it really gives a very clear and rather stark picture of the uphill battle that brands in this category face. It is a constant daily battle. A lot of consumer goods brands, you know, if you ask them, they'll tell you how much of their money they spend on digital advertising, Google, Facebook, what have you. And so much of that is closed off to brands in this space. And they're smaller brands, they're founder-led brands. Even if it's not completely closed off, they have to spend about 10 times the man hours to just get ads up and like figure out what words they can use than a normal brand. And so you can imagine, just imagine if you're a brand founder not being able to run digital ads or only being able to run about 5% of the digital ads that you do now. Now, the good part about it is that they have become really inventive and creative with how they get the word out of their brands, but it's still very unequal and just very unfair and needs to change. And then globally, this market is opening up conversations all over the world. In North America, I think we're pretty prudish here still, but we are able to talk about things, talk about women's pleasure, talk about periods, talk about vaginas, with a certain amount of freedom. And other places in the world where it's more patriarchal, this is advancements in this category are opening up conversations, and there's so much room for growth there. I'll say Kedish again. She's in the Middle East launching her brand and grew up in a very strict Muslim household. And part of her like reason to exist is that she wants to help other women that grew up in the Middle East not feel that stigma of like not being able to talk. She tells a story about like women going into marriage, like on their wedding night, not even knowing what is about to happen, like literally do not understand a penis going into the vagina, don't know anything about that. And there's Asian cultures too. And what's exciting is that there are so many brands launching and talking about these issues and bringing products to market in these markets where I think we're going to see a lot of expansion in the coming years there. And that's it.
Great. Claire, thank you very much. I'm just curious from your perspective as you're looking at this market develop, how do you see a trend of existing larger brands suddenly saying, this is a nice growth market. I'd like a piece of this action here. You know, the same way they kind of went into CBD or went into other kind of areas. Or is it still all the difficulties almost create a natural barrier to keep the larger players out? They were like, well, there's other easier fish for me to go after. This market seems more complicated. I don't want to spend all that labor on figuring out how to get around Facebook and so I can talk about vulva. What are your thoughts there?
I think they're getting into it through acquisition, and a lot of what the founder-led brands bring to market are just like what the big brands can't do. They don't know how to like have their finger on the pulse like that. They're obviously not as nimble. And so we do see brands, I think it was P&G acquired This Is L. And so that's an organic pad and tampon company. So they'll come to it through acquisition because they know they're probably going to not come to market in a way that's going to be as successful as these founder-led brands. Going back to like the grooming, we'll see lots of acquisitions there because again, that's an easier category for them to get into, like dealing with body hair and deodorant rather than like real vaginal care.
I see. And then Claire, lastly, what are some of the things, is there anything that you see that perhaps doesn't sit well with you? How this category may be people taking advantage of interest in the category, people putting out products that are not safe, people not using the right ingredients. Do you hear any of that? Do you see people kind of, learning the hard way without realizing that this is different?
Well, I think that as consumers, everyone is different. Everyone's physiology is different. So you never want to supersede like medical attention and medical care if you need it. I don't see brands doing that too much. There are certainly, I think it was Vagisil recently released a line for preteens and they got roundly scolded for it because it was all about smelling fresh. I mean, all of that stuff is complete BS. And that is like the one predatory thing I would say. Anything, like those brands that are trying to douches or things that are trying to make you smell like a, I don't know, whatever, they're a tropical flower or something. If you're selling it in a way that's like something is wrong with you, I have issue with that. But for the most part, these brands, these founders, they're vulva and vagina owners themselves, and they want to empower women, not tear them down.
Got it. Well, ladies, Thank you very much, Manon. Thank you for providing the foundation, as always, on what the underlying physiology is and how it all works. Julie, thank you so much for providing the commercial perspective and all the various challenges to get a product to market and keep it in market. And Claire, very insightful, the specific brands and the trends that we're seeing here. If you have questions for our panelists, we are still a couple of minutes before we end today. So type them in now before we wrap the program up. We are also going to thank our sponsor, Europelab, for their support in putting this together. They just don't sponsor, they're actively involved. So Sarah, Manon, and a large number of their team helped to put this material together. And one thing that's great about them is, similar to Julie, they believe the high tide will raise all ships. So even having other brands on the show that, you know, maybe in the same market as them, they don't care. They want good products that help address real customer needs. And as long as you're developing your products responsibly, I think everybody wins. So if you want to develop your products responsibly, give my friend Sarah a call. Yeah. Now we're going to be back.
I just want to break in to say, like, one of the things I absolutely love about this category is that all the founders are like that. The whole rising tide lifts up. It's so beautiful. Like, one will raise funding, and another founder that's like a direct competitor will call that founder and be like, "We did it, Joe." Just so happy, and it's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
And we can change over time, right?
Yeah.
Well, it won't be in the next category. I think next category, SPF is becoming cutthroat. So we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time. We're going to do a deep dive into two other subcategories: SPF, which has been getting a lot of attention. You saw Supergoop just got bought, and Acne Care, which has been, you know, out there. But I think as the science has evolved, and that's what I think one of the reasons it's so interesting is our understanding of the physiology has also changed. And now we understand there are many different kinds of acne. And so we're going to open that category up the same way and really see what's happening in there and what people should think about when they're trying to develop product there. So with that, I'd like to once again thank our wonderful panelists, thank our good friends at Europelab, and thank you, our wonderful audience. I hope you learned something. And if you missed something, don't worry about it. We're going to be having it up in the replay section of the website within 24 hours. Take care, and everyone have a good weekend. Bye.